started. Calling the Wastewater Committee meeting to order. I think we're going to take the agenda slightly out of sequence here, just because Anastasia doesn't need to listen to the watershed permit status and a variety of other topics on the agenda, and she's the high-paid consultant. Scott, you're lesser paid, I guess, huh? Just kidding. Anyway, Anastasia, if you wouldn't mind, obviously the last that we talked about it with the committee, we were anticipating your work at the transfer station. That's now happened. Tell us what happened and what's next.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Kurt. So what I'll do is I'll provide a broad overview, and if anybody has questions or wants more details, please feel free to ask. So we're doing a two-part project to assess the capacity for effluent disposal at the treatment facility. So what's been done up to this point is a 3-day field investigation process where we ran a series of hydraulic load tests to test the effluent capacity of the site. All the results were very favorable. As part of the analysis, we installed a monitoring well, and we have about 35 feet to groundwater, which is good. And we were showing very high percolation rates and infiltration rates through the 3-day load testing. So Mass DEP typically allows you, if you have high infiltration rates, to use a design loading rate of 5 gallons per day per square foot. Based on the loading rates that were received and conversations with Mass DEP for other communities, we would recommend a slightly higher rate of 7 gallons per day per square foot. And that's what we'll be including in our memo. And that's what we'll be using to size the area for the alternative build out. And then Mass DEP does allow that if this infrastructure was ever constructed with these types of infiltration rates, you could do additional testing with treated effluent to see if you could get an even higher loading rate for that site. And so the next part of the process is to lay out a proposed layout for the transfer station, and then to see where the effluent goes, into which subwatersheds. While we're together, I did want to clarify a couple of assumptions for that groundwater modeling analysis. And so the first would be, is it correct to assume that the flow that we'll be using is the alternate build out from the Cape Cod Commission 2020 analysis, which is 425,000 gallons per day? And sorry, Scott, you're on mute. I'm just assuming you're agreeing with everything I'm saying.
No, that sounds great. I think we provided a memo from Tim Passakarnis from the Cape Cod Commission, who I believe translated the build out numbers into the flow. And your number, I think you just said 425,000 gallons per day. That sounds like that's in the right range. I need to refer back to his memo, and if you have that, I think that's that is the best estimate of the full build out as far as I know, but I'll double check that with you and get back to you, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Okay, and so in that memo, there's 2 assumptions. There's one of the flow rate, and then assuming an effluent nitrogen concentration of 5 milligrams per liter. So if you can confirm also that that's the appropriate effluent nitrogen to use.
Sure.
And so the next step in this process, we're currently refining the USGS model for a
Anastasia,
smaller
can I just interrupt you for a second? Ryan, I don't know if who can unmute Ryan. I can't, but Ryan had a question.
Hi, Ryan.
Yes, so you kept referring to the alternate build out, and I thought that we had decided, or that it had been decided not to use the alternate build out because the town has already reached that build out with pre-existing construction to date.
No, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Anastasia, but I think what you meant by that was this is the backup plan, so it's an alternative to the major group of alternatives, which are non-structured solutions, so not related.
So looking, and I actually have the memo pulled up if it would be helpful to share it, or I can just read out of it. But in that memo, it does talk about what's called an alternate build out that's based on a housing and population trend. So it's looking at a future condition based on population projections.
Yeah, so that's the one build out that.
Anastasia, is this the memo from Tim that you're referring to?
Yes, from Tim.
Okay, because I thought, Ryan, I understand your question. I thought that this analysis used a higher number. But again, I'll need to go back and circle back with Tim to confirm that, but
Yeah, it uses the 20,000 kilograms per year, which is what we
Yeah.
just talked about with Brian.
I think this is
To
the
confirm.
highest one, but I'm not sure about
Yeah.
that, Ryan. So I will double check that and get back to both you and Anastasia.
Yeah,
But
we have
Maybe a
been
terminology
consistently,
problem.
yeah,
but-
we've been consistently, at least for that number, been talking about the highest number for planning purposes.
Yep, I know. That's why I was a little concerned with
Yeah,
the phrase there.
no, we're definitely planning on the higher number.
Anastasia, just for your benefit, there were 2 build outs done really at the conclusion of the MEP analysis. And we had talked as a wastewater committee before and decided to use the higher number, which is what Ryan's referring to. And it may be just a terminology problem, which one is the alternative,
Yeah.
and which one's not. But again, I'll double check back with both Tim and you on that and confirm.
Perfect.
Okay.
Anastasia, just before you move on there for a second, what impact does the difference between 5 gallons per square foot or 7 gallons per square foot mean?
Essentially, it means that you have a smaller footprint for your sand beds, which reduces or translates to reduced construction costs.
And in terms of area, you haven't really done the calc in terms of the total load, so you wouldn't know, but.
So based on that alternate build out, we're assuming an area of 133,000 square feet. So do I have the capability to share screen on this?
Sure, should be able to.
Okay, let me just pull up something. So this is a draft figure. Can everybody see my screen?
Nope.
Not yet.
Better?
Yep.
Yep.
So this is a preliminary sizing for that alternate build out of 425,000 square feet. And to orient everybody, the testing that was conducted here on the northeastern side of the cleared part of the property.
Anastasia, you said 425,000 square feet, but I think you meant gallons per day, right?
Yes. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Yep.
Which translates to 133,000 square feet. And I'll include this with the draft memo that I'll be sending for the hydraulic load testing, but if there's any comments on where that footprint should be, that's something that would be helpful in the modeling to make sure that we're recharging at the area that's being looked at. I didn't know if there were any initial comments or if where we've placed it preliminarily is appropriate.
Anastasia, I guess I have one quick question. You mentioned 35 feet to groundwater. Is that, do you think that covers this whole area that you're identifying or close to it? Do you have a sense of that? And also, where was the perk test done in relation to that square? Oh, right there. Okay.
So right here. And I know, Scott, you've sent me the topographical map of this area.
Right.
So let me look at the numbers to see how it compares to the topography.
Okay. Okay.
But based on that, we should have adequate distance to groundwater, but I will confirm that.
So is it fair to say at this point that it's a likelihood that the site can handle the 425,000?
Yes.
Yeah. Not without the consideration of any impacts on the stream and whatnot, which obviously needs to be looked at, but just in terms of hydraulics, it looks
Yes.
like it's going to work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything from the field investigations was very favorable and very similar to other sites that have been developed on the Cape. And what you just mentioned with where it goes, that's the next step in this process that we're undertaking now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I know that was a very broad overview of what's happened so far. Were there any questions?
Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know, I think, I'm not sure who the organizer of the meeting is, but Fred was trying to get in and was having trouble. The organizer wasn't.
He should
letting
be in
him
now.
Okay, terrific. Hillary just texted me. She's going to be joining shortly as well.
Okay.
Thanks. So is that kind of it, Anastasia?
Yeah. So we're currently updating the groundwater model. I'll confirm the parameters that we'll be using for it with Scott. And then in early January, we'll have the results of that, and perhaps I could come back to present our initial findings.
That sounds great. There have been we've been challenged with a flurry of questions about impacts on the Herring River. And I know you're going to be doing that as part of the analysis here. Is there anything at this point that would prohibit or would cause you any great concerns as far as groundwater impacts here?
Let's so I think that would be a better conversation once we have the results of the groundwater model. Right, because that'll depend on where the model is indicating that this flow is going to.
Okay.
Is that the question that you were asking, or I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah, there have been a lot of concerns about impacts on the Herring River.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a backup plan, so there's a limit to the extent that we can, fully characterize. And of course, if a facility were proposed, it would go through a complete, EIR, if not a more significant environmental review. But several stages would come to play at a future date. But anyway, preliminarily, there have just been some concerns raised there, and so I just wanted to let you know.
No, thank you. And what the model will do is quantify where that effluent nitrogen load at the concentration that we're specifying, what subwatersheds it goes to, and once that's been quantified, then the conversation becomes what mitigation measure would be used to offset that load that's being added to the watershed, particularly to the Herring River.
How about with respect to any other contaminants of emerging concern?
Let me discuss that a little bit with our modeling team. I know that's a question that's coming up in many communities now in terms of CECs, or contaminants of emerging concern, and what happens when you're concentrating them in one area and sending them to a limited amount of subwatersheds. I can speak to that at the next meeting.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Is there
Okay.
One thing, when Tim Passakarnis did his calculations on maximum flows, et cetera, I believe he included a flow from the Herring River watershed to offset the additional nitrogen added to that watershed, such that it would be a net zero nitrogen increase. I believe that's part of the calculations, but again, I'll check that when I get back to Anastasia and Ryan and others about that. But I think the 425 includes a collection of an adequate amount of wastewater within the Herring River watershed and treatment of it such to offset the additional nitrogen, if that's clear.
Perfect. And then we can do a nitrogen balance once that model's been run, just to confirm those results.
Right, right.
Sorry, this is Jeff Gregg from GHD. Is that, is the Herring River there is primarily freshwater, correct? Or do you know, or was that,
It is now,
Yes.
although there's a restoration project plan that's going to change various reaches of it to brackish, if not salt. The
okay,
idea is to open up the dike and restore some salt marsh. So some of the fresh reaches will become brackish.
because
Yeah,
that,
it would,
yeah,
yeah, it would depend, Anastasia, on where you're looking at the any impacts. To the extent that they can be relatively pinpointed, we could look at the Herring River restoration plans to see where how far up the salt plume would likely migrate.
Yeah, they have
Yeah,
modeling
I-
for the salinity.
Yeah,
The modeling basically gets salinity up until Route 6. Okay, and then once it goes under Route 6, you're pretty much all fresh. But that was my last time I looked at it.
so it would be somewhat brackish then in this area.
That's my guess, but like I'd have to look at the plan again.
because that'll be important for any attenuation or anything like that too. So, or which even with which nutrient we'd be more concerned with. Is it phosphorus limited, or is it nitrogen limited, or is it a little bit of both? And then obviously the CECs is a separate item.
Terrific. Any other questions for Anastasia? Or Jeff? Great. Well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to hearing the next update, and hopefully that's giving you a little more to chew on as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you both. I see we've got quite a crowd that are very interested in talking about responsible management entity. So I guess, Jack, since you're probably the most senior on the call, in deference to you, did you want to start, or Patty, on presenting some ideas that the commission and the county are working on with respect to RME?
And Jack, hey, Kurt, maybe I'll just jump in here for 1 minute first, if that's okay, and then turn it over to Jack. I just want to say that we've had some very good calls with Jack and Brian and Sean at the county health and the county. And I think they are trying to help us with this plan in any way they can. And as we all know, we're starting to focus on INA systems as a significant part of the plan, and specifically the so-called enhanced INAs. So we reached out to Jack and Brian and others to look at what possibilities there might be to develop this so-called RME structure, which I think is going to be critical. And I'll also mention and thank Patty Daly for joining us today. Patty from the commission, who's offered to provide some assistance as well on the legalese, if you will. So maybe at that point, I'll just turn it back to Jack. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. What we told Scott is we wanted to play a support role for you, Kurt, on this by offering low interest loans, probably in the range of 1.5%, 1.5%, to homeowners to convert. In addition to that, Brian wants to work with DEP to do the monitoring work that'll be necessary. DEP doesn't want to necessarily deal with a lot of individual homeowners. He would like to have a monitoring group in play. And we're willing to support that 100% to help you initiate this movement. And of course, Patty brings planning expertise and assets that you might possibly need. So we're here to support you. And that's our only role here. Brian, of course, is he's been developing these INA systems, so he can speak a lot more in depth on the actual systems themselves.
I guess I'll just kind of open up, just ask a couple of questions. One would be, I'm assuming that a ultimately the responsible management entity is still the town. So what I'm gathering or sort of maybe reading between the lines here would be that with respect to technical expertise in managing the sampling and reporting requirements from enhanced IAs, that's kind of where you're seeing the county role.
Yes, that would be one of the roles we play.
And then obviously Patty's expertise in terms of helping to potentially draft legal documents between the homeowner and the county with respect to, who's going to be providing what services and at what prices and those sorts of things.
Yep. And the loans would come right out of the septic loan fund that we already administer. So it's all set up and ready to go, including all the closing documents. That's the easy part for us.
Hey, Kurt,
And Brian would handle the technical end of the monitoring.
I might suggest if not to put them on the spot, but maybe ask both Brian and Patty if they have a few words just to introduce from their angle a little bit more about this, because this is frankly a potentially complicated subject, and I think we all need to learn about what the possibilities are. So, Brian, looks like you got one of your best INA systems right behind you there.
Yeah. This is the top of the line technology here. So, so by way of introduction, for those who don't know me, I'm Brian Baumgartel. I'm a sanitarian at the Department of Health and Environment, also the director of the test center out on Joint Base Cape Cod. I've worked with George Hoyfelder, who I'm sure a lot of you know very closely over the last few years, trying to absorb every little bit of knowledge from him that I can before he finally decides to fully retire. So George is still around. I like to joke he's down to like a 45-hour week now in retirement. So one of the other programs that I work on is the IA tracking and management program. So we already track and manage over 3,000 systems for all of the towns on Cape Cod. We also do Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and a few towns off Cape as well. So we do Wareham, the town of Sharon, the town of Westport is joining us soon. The town of Marion will also be joining us soon as well. So we have an extensive set of experience with relation to tracking and data handling and managing alternative septic systems. But as good as our sort of system is, I think, the sort of the next permutation of a management system is to, look at what you're looking at, which is the responsible management entity type of setup. So I don't know if you folks have seen it at all. EPA put together a really great document, and I can, circulate the link around, but it's called the Voluntary National Guidelines for Management of On-Site and Clustered Decentralized Wastewater Treatment Systems. They put this out in the early 2000s, I think, and it's since been updated. But this document provides what they came up with as 5 different models for managing IA systems, everything from, just homeowner awareness. So basically, having people sort of understand what's buried in their yard and how they should properly maintain it, up through, the type of system that we have now, which is, just a tracking sort of system to make sure that contracts are in place and, utilizing private contractors who are selected by the actual homeowners. And those contractors also do the sampling and submit that data to us. And then, it kind of goes on up through 2 forms of RME. The first level of RME that they list, the model number 4, which is an operation and maintenance only RME. So that RME would take basically what we do now, but sort of layer on a bit more operation and management directly. So instead of the homeowner contracting directly with a private contractor for the operation and maintenance, they actually are provided that service via the responsible management entity. So that RME could either hire staff to do that operation and maintenance and sampling, or they could perhaps subcontract with existing companies. So there are quite a few of these existing companies around on the Cape. It's a little bit of a cottage industry right now. Companies like Coastal Engineering, I'm sure you've heard of, Bennett and O'Reilly. These are the people who are out there on the field right now doing the operation and maintenance on IA systems. So We could potentially, like I said, hire staff, or we could subcontract with one of these existing companies and utilize their experience, and perhaps, get some economies of scale, by rolling out this program in an entire town, with perhaps 100, 200 systems, not knowing kind of where you're going to end up. You can get some economies of scale, and cheaper costs from these individual companies as a possibility. The fifth model that EPA mentions is actually an ownership model of RME, where the RME actually owns the system that's installed at a residence or a commercial location, which would be obviously in terms of complexity significantly more complex, and also a higher financial sort of burden for the RME to take on. So there would have to be a pretty robust funding stream in order to do something like that, especially in the beginning when you're trying to put the program together. You'd need a decent pot of money to be able to pay to install systems. The RME itself would collect funds back from the homeowners for the operation and maintenance, and also for paying for the physical units themselves. This model I would kind of equate to, a sewer in terms of decentralized and on-site systems, where the town, where the RME owns the system and operates the system and passes on a cost to the homeowner, so that the homeowner, doesn't have to worry necessarily about if the system fails. They're going to be, directly on the hook for replacing it. If there's an issue mechanically with the system, they're not covering costs on those things. And the other kind of nice thing about, the ownership model is that there's a distributed risk amongst everybody who has these systems. So with sewers, it's not necessarily on one person to pay for when a sewer, a treatment plant fails. It's really, borne either by the tax base or by the people who are using the system, the sewage system. So, this sort of helps distribute the cost and lower some of the risk to the individual homeowners. So there are a few advantages. Like I said, it's a much more complex model in terms of the financing and management piece, but certainly doable. And as for, you had made a comment a little bit ago about the RME being the town. I think, there is some opportunity for the town. So the town ultimately holds, obviously, the regulatory authority. So they're a key player in the whole process, but the town can also set up language that would designate another entity as an RME. So certain parts of the country where these projects have come up, they've designated maybe a water management district, or they've designated another nonprofit organization or another government organization to be the RME for it. It provides, a little bit of fluidity as to, who's actually doing the management in case, problems came up down the road or something like that. So, so those are, I highly suggest looking at, through this document as you're sort of putting together your thoughts on what your RME should look like. And I'm always happy to, help provide technical support in that regard, and any advice you might need. So yeah, I'll stop my little spiel there and take questions, or jump over to Patty.
Yeah,
Brian, this is for advantagement. I mean, like you provided us with a lot of information just then.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, whoa. So I'm kind of going, okay, well, wait a minute. I mean, like, a responsible management entity for the operation and maintenance. What I gather is for the operation and maintenance of either a single system or a host of systems.
Yep.
The nuts and bolts of this. I mean, like, I understand these IA systems from an engineering level.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, what are they going to do for us for this operation and maintenance? Yeah.
Sure. So as it stands now, if you install an IA system anywhere, not, RME notwithstanding, you are required by the state to have an operation and maintenance contract in place for your system at all times. So that contract is with a certified wastewater treatment plant operator who has training in the operation of your system. Because as you know, these systems are not just simple, gravity and a D-box and a leach field. They're quite a bit more complex in some cases, particularly when you're talking, sequencing batch reactors or membrane bioreactors or those types of technologies. So, you really need a certified operator to be able to do the maintenance and actually operate the system. And that's what you would have. I mean, that's what you have at treatment plants. Those are operation and maintenance folks. Or you would have at smaller decentralized or clustered systems where you're doing a whole commercial development or, flows over 10,000 gallons per day. So in terms of operation and maintenance, that might mean, making process adjustments, making chemical additions if necessary, providing repairs, replacing blowers, failed pumps, those types of things. So, as with any mechanical system, those issues come up from time to time. So to have somebody who's qualified to be able to do these things is definitely critical to, IA systems functioning properly. It's really the most critical piece of the whole thing is to make sure that they're operated and maintained on a good schedule. So that's does that sort of answer what you were looking for?
Well, I don't know. The IA systems I saw, the operations and maintenance to them was minimal. Okay. And I mean, yeah, I could see here and there, every few years you got to, maybe, replace some chips or something like that, or, there's a blower part that goes down. But I mean, the operation and maintenance for the system is minimal. I understand the requirement. I'm just wondering, like, what, what, from my, and granted, I have limited knowledge of all the other different kinds, but the ones I'm looking at, I'm going, there ain't a whole lot of operation and maintenance going on here, right? If it's required, how much is that going to cost, and what is the to the either the individual, the town, or or to like you say, if you basically are leasing the system to a whole group of people and you're responsible for the operation and maintenance. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the current requirement is, with the current sort of regulatory structure, you're looking at least once per year for a maintenance visit for these systems. The newer technologies, as they sort of come into the pipe through the pilot and provisional process through DEP, which is sort of, when a new technology comes in, they want to sell their unit, they have to start out with what's called the pilot approval. So basically, DEP says, okay, go ahead, you can install up to 12 of these things somewhere, find willing participants to take a risk on these. You have to monitor them once per month, then you have to operate them at the same schedule. Once they've sort of passed that first phase, the piloting phase, they're allowed to move on to what's called provisional approval. Provisional approval allows you to install up to 50 systems in the Commonwealth. And those systems have to be monitored and maintained on a quarterly basis. Once they've, provided sufficient data to demonstrate that they could pass that provisional phase, they can move on to either a general or remedial approval. General approval being, new construction type of scenarios. Remedial being situations where you have a house with a failed septic system where they need to install a new system. So, DEP has kind of gone back and forth on how many maintenance and sampling visits they're going to require for those general and remedials, but those have to be operated and maintained at least once per year. Some of the towns have also added, additional sampling requirements on top of that DEP required schedule. So they might, a town might also require, a general system to be inspected quarterly, regardless of what DEP says, or they might require sampling quarterly, regardless of what DEP says. So, there's quite a range of different requirements out there. And really, when it comes to the operation and maintenance of the individual systems, yeah, there is definitely quite a vast array of technologies and, different levels of the amount of attention that they need. If you have something, really simple, like a recirculating sand filter, or the Nitrex technology from Lombardo Systems, for the most part, with the exception of the aeration unit that is required before it, like a Septitex type of system that's required before it. If you're looking at the technology from Clean 2 Systems, which is one of the newer technologies coming on board. And I'm sure you've probably heard about it in the process of this, your regulatory changes. We have two of those systems here. We have the nitro system we have physically at the test center. This is where he developed the technology, by the way. We have his larger flow system, which is called Santo, which is basically an expanded version of the nitro system that's able to handle, up to 1,200 gallons a day in his configuration. And those have, like I said, very minimal operation to them. There's an air pump, but in terms of operation, you're looking at, is the air pump functioning properly? Are the air laterals balanced? Because he has multiple air laterals in there that may have to be adjusted over time as those diffusers, slowly plug up with biological activity. There's things like checking sludge depths, because you're not necessarily dealing with a septic tank. Obviously, sludge can build up a bit quicker in a tank that's, a section of a system that's only, 500 gallons or so. There are some definite, there's a heavier operation and maintenance cost that comes with these. Like I said, it's based on what DEP has. I don't know in the scope of a watershed permit if there can be a reduced schedule depending on the technology. In terms of the operation and maintenance, I know DEP has been open to sort of some alternatives for the sampling schedules. So instead of requiring that every system get sampled once per year, they might say, maybe you can do, a 12th of the systems or a 10th of the systems in a year and kind of cycle that 10th around so that over the course of 5 years or so, you've sampled them all. I don't know if they'd be open to allowing that sort of similar situation for the operation and maintenance of the systems. So yeah, that's it. Like I said, it ranges a lot between the different types of technologies, and depending on what people select and what the sort of the going system is out there, it's going to be a different time investment for the town or for the owner, depending on who has to pay for it.
Hey, Fred, I just want to add one other response from what Brian just said. And Brian just mentioned the watershed permit, which of course is what we're after here as our goal. And I think it's fair to say that DEP, if they're going to allow the town to rely on an extensive number of INAs as part of this permit, they're going to want to have somebody really not only overseeing the operation maintenance, but crunching the numbers on the performance and documenting that, et cetera, et cetera. And as we get into this, if the town goes this direction, there's going to be a lot more of these to keep track of. So I think that's another consideration that I think, suggests that some sort of a more formal RME structure rather than just these individual contracts between homeowners and firms that are doing these annual inspections. Somebody's got to oversee this whole cumulative operation. And, Brian and his shop right now are really the experts, not only here in Cape Cod, but to some degree nationally on this subject. So we've got a great resource here that I think we want to really think about this carefully. This report that Brian mentioned, I've started looking through it, and I think we'll want to have a more detailed discussion in the future. And I'm hoping Brian and others can join us again to look at these different options, because I think there are a number that we should consider here. And I do want to see if Patty wants to add a few comments here before we finish up on this subject, because I think she's still with us here.
I am, thank you.
Chomping at the bit to get in.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patty Daly. I'm a law and policy specialist with the Cape Cod Commission. Currently having my roof reshingled, so I apologize for the noise if you hear any. Yeah, I had a conversation with Scott about this a while ago and started looking into it. And first of all, I want to agree with Brian and Scott. To the extent you're looking to rely on IA systems or advanced IA to show DEP you're going to meet your TMDLs, you're going to probably need an entity that's responsible for overseeing the installation, the O&M, but probably the most important part is the reporting back to DEP so that they can start taking away or checking off that certain amounts of kilograms are being reduced within the watershed towards TMDL compliance. So that's the way I see the larger picture for this here. I've dug into the town of Falmouth has a draft RME program that would have the town operating that. That was put together by the Buzzards Bay Coalition for them. So I've taken a good look at that. Have a call with Sarah Burns at the Nature Conservancy tomorrow. And I'll be following up with Brian and Sean O'Brien at County Health on Friday to talk about what the county role might be in using their SRF funding for financing, as well as working on the O&M, what the lab can do, what other opportunities the county might have to assist. So just doing a deep dive into this right now, particularly this week. But Cape Cod Commission is happy to work with you all and help put a program together that makes sense for Wellfleet, and whether that's a fully town operated RME or one that the town designates to another entity or some hybrid between the town and the county. Be happy to work through those conversations with you all as you make decisions.
That's terrific. Yeah, I think just to put a point on what Fred said earlier, Brian, I think most of our systems are likely to be the individual homeowner type systems. We have a couple of examples where we might be looking at a cluster. We've actually been actively working on a project at 95 Lawrence Road, which is a proposed new affordable housing complex. But the larger scale projects are relatively limited. So the mix is going to clearly look more like individual homeowners. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind that Wellfleet has, I think Hillary's got the exact numbers, but it's more than 300 IA systems in the ground in the town right now. So I think we have per capita, I think we've got one of the largest numbers of these currently installed. And kind of what, the one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, and reacting to what DEP is requiring and EPA is requiring and so on, is I can envision a couple of different scenarios down the road. One is based on the sampling and monitoring that goes on, it looks like these things perform really well, and the original OEM installer is more than capable of maintaining the parts and so on, and they're going to get the performance that we expect. And the other possible future is that they really don't, and they require significantly more intervention and hand-holding than we expect right now. None of us knowing which scenario is going to unfold. So clearly, we've got not just the responsibilities of the contractor to maintain a system that they've designed and installed, but as you said, Patty, the reporting. Who's going to do the collect and manage all that reporting? So I can see a variety of different pieces of value add clearly with what you're talking about. Also being sensitive to Fred and the homeowner that, to the extent that we can minimize collection, that we can eventually maybe, because they perform really well, get away from a high level of routine monitoring because they just work. And ultimately at the end of the day, the amount of money that we spend on making sure that these things work the way they're designed and so on is also, potentially moving money away from other things that we could be implementing in the watershed, with our ultimate goal being, in watershed nitrogen levels that are reaching our targets, regardless of the individual systems here. And the last thing I'll say is that, again, to just put to clarify a little bit about the term, responsible management entity, it's one thing when we're talking about, for example, these enhanced IA systems. So I'm thinking about it a little bit differently, because we're not just talking about enhanced IAs, we're also talking about permeable reactive barriers, we're talking about salt marsh restoration, and a variety of other components within the overall watershed permit. So I think the town is going to still have, what I'm thinking of as an ultimate management responsibility for implementing the watershed permit. But clearly, this is a huge opportunity for us to be able to potentially subcontract with you folks or others for various components, because we're obviously not going to be able to staff up to that level for all of the IAs that would, for example, be installed. Does that make sense? John, can somebody unmute John?
I should be unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, I think I'm very concerned that we pay a lot of attention to this monitoring and the responsible entity for two reasons. One is we have a mix of housing here in Wellfleet. We have part-time residents, we have full-time residents, we have housing that's used for 3 months a year, 6 months a year, but then gets, used sometime in the winter. And all of these variant usage of the systems put different kinds of pressure on the systems. And I think it's very important that we monitor very closely how these systems are working down the road, especially in a town like Wellfleet, where the usage is so different from one house to another house. I think the don't have as much faith in the individual homeowner. My experience of individual homeowners in our town is that very few of them actually abide by their responsibility for pumping their existing Title V system. So I'm not particularly encouraged to put a lot of responsibility on the homeowner. I think it's very important we have some sort of centralized authority that is doing continuous monitoring, at least for the next 10 or 15 years, till we really know how these systems are working. I think it would be a mistake if we kind of let things get lost and all of a sudden we've got a nitrate problem, and a lot of people invest a lot of money in the enhanced system.
Yeah, DEP won't let us do that anyway, John. It got me a lot of monitoring.
Kurt, you said that there are already IA systems in place, and somebody's got to be doing some monitoring on them right now. I mean, based on what I just heard, if you put an IA system in, there's an operation and maintenance and a monitoring program that's got to go on with it. That's a requirement. So,
Hillary, do you want to kind of comment on that for the existing IAs? You're muted. There you go.
There you go. Sorry. The county does a bulk of the monitoring, and then we work with them on follow-up enforcement. So each system that goes in the ground has a service contract associated with it and a service provider. And all of the inspectional information gets put into a database that's online that we have access to, the county has access to, and the providers have access to. And when systems need tweaking, we do follow up on those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my apologies. I gave a poor description of our tracking program at the beginning. So yeah, so we track, well over 3,000 of these systems. So the operators, they report all of that information, whether that's the inspection or the monitoring results. We also use that data to follow up to make sure that each system has a contract in place for the operation of maintenance that they're required to have. We do that on behalf of the towns, and we're able to save the towns a lot of staff time in chasing down the ones that are the sort of low-hanging fruit. The people who the contract lapsed and they didn't realize it, or thought they could get away with something and realized later that they couldn't. And then for the sort of the really difficult folks, that's when we have to handle those over to Hillary, because the Board of Health is really the one that has the regulatory authority. We just provide the assistance with the tracking and the monitoring, and we're not doing the physical operation and maintenance on these systems. We're not doing the physical sampling, but the data is reported to us, and we keep track to make sure that everything has been done that has been required to be done. And it's given us quite a robust data set in the process. We've got well over 150,000 individual data points that we've collected over the last 15 years with this program, water quality data points for all of the systems that are out there. So, it's given us some real insight into performance of these systems.
So what I'm hearing here is that there's a systems and processes and contractors in place already that are doing this work, this operations, maintenance, and monitoring work on these IA systems, and they feed that to the county, and the county then says that we have a problem, Houston, they call you, Hillary. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sort of like, and I understand there's other ways of doing it other than on a system by system basis. We could do group of systems. we could lease systems, I get all of that. I'm just kind of saying that this doesn't seem to be a big challenge, just how we do it, The responsible management entity doesn't seem to be a big challenge. There are systems and processes and contractors out there right now to do this work. It's just a matter of how do we want to set it up for Wellfleet.
Right. Yeah.
And then I would go, like, if we go down the road of saying, okay, well, listen, we want this, we want to set up a contract for all the systems in Wellfleet, and you put your IA system 10 years ago, and you're still, you already have a contractor in place. We're not, that's already grandfathered in.
Right. The existing, I would say the biggest difference between the existing system and doing an RME is that the RME is the one who's ultimately responsible. They're the ones who hold the operating permit for the system, whereas the homeowner currently holds the operating permit for the system. So the responsible management entity is the one who's on the hook for the system if it's got issues, if it has functional issues with it, or the monitoring isn't, where it's supposed to be. That's the real key difference is in the existing system that fully falls on the homeowner. Whereas with an RME, you have a little bit, I guess, of a pooled risk with these things. Is if you run into problems, you're not necessarily hammering a homeowner, an individual homeowner, for a system that might have issues and it's not really their fault. Whereas now it's fully borne by the homeowner in terms of responsibility and cost.
Let me make a suggestion here. There's a lot more here we need to think about, talk about. Brian has outlined that there are 5 models that are being, suggested to consideration by EPA. Frankly, the number 5, which he was talking about, is something we're talking about in Barnstable right now, and that would be somebody else owns a component of these systems, not the homeowner, but maybe the town owns that. So there's a lot of options here. And the other thing Brian mentioned is sharing risk, which is an important consideration here. So there's a lot of parts to this, and Patty, Brian, Hillary, and I, and others are starting to work on this together. And I think what I can suggest is give us a little bit of time, and we'll come back with some specific options that might be a little bit more clear for the wastewater committee and the town to consider. But I can tell you, as part of my role here in trying to get the town this watershed permit, I think we need this. I really do. I think this is going to be really important for Mass DEP. I think as we describe what the options are, this might become a little more clear how this differs from the existing situation, and also what some of the benefits of it might be. But my thought, Kurt, is we're not going to solve this today, obviously.
No. This is a great starting point. I know I'll look forward to reading the document. That'll be helpful. But at least to get concepts out there to be thinking about in terms of who could do what and how it compares with what we're doing now. I think we've had a really good discussion.
Good.
Patty, anything else? Jack, did you want to add anything else? Jack, thank you so much for coming, and Patty, we really appreciate having you join us in struggling through this process. And especially Jack, I know we're going to be talking more about financing options, and we didn't talk too much about that, but we obviously want to integrate more of what the county's thinking is there. I think the streamlined process you're talking about could be phenomenally advantageous for us. And we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, guys.
Moving on to the next agenda item. And actually, before we do that, I know we will continue to talk about this more. Scott, if you get that document, if you could just circulate it.
I will.
or
I'll send it
Hillary,
around. Yep.
That'd be great.
Sure.
I know everybody would want to take a look at that. And
Yep.
we'll make sure that that's a topic for the next meeting.
Good.
I guess the next thing on the agenda is the watershed permit status. And I know Anika has been dying to talk more about her investigation in the permeable reactive barrier area, but just as one component of it.
Let me just give a quick
But,
introduction.
go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so as you know, Another component of our plan that we've talked about has been permeable reactive barrier, specifically along Commercial Street or South Commercial Street. And the more I think about this and evaluate, I really do think it is an important component that we want to put forward in the plan. So I think, as many of you may know, I teach a couple classes up in Boston, one at Harvard Extension, one at Tufts, on water resources management. And I have my students work on real practical issues to the extent they can. And one of the projects that I offered for students to look at is our Wellfleet plan. So Annika Quick is here, and she just presented to our class, and I thought she gave a really good presentation on looking at some options for the PRB along Commercial Street. So I asked her if she'd be willing to join us here and do the presentation again. It's only 5 or 10 minutes. We've pared it down, so it won't take much time, but I do think that there's some really interesting options for that area. So if we can get Annika to share her screen, we'll just walk through that and see if there are some questions, but I think you'll find this informative.
All right, so hopefully you can see my screen, and thank you so much for letting me join. It's been fun to kind of be a fly on the wall and see how all of this stuff that we're learning about works in the real world. As Scott mentioned, I'm taking this class right now. My background is in aqueous biogeochemistry. And so specifically in the past, I've done research on nitrogen cycling in stream sediment. So somewhat related, and it's been interesting to look at this project. So you are all very familiar with the nitrogen issues in the area, and I'm specifically looking at Duck Creek and how a PRB in that area could reduce nitrate loading. So just to orient you, this area outlined in yellow right here is kind of this potential pilot PRB site. And I'll zoom in a little bit, but there are 2 gravel parking lots right here. One is owned by the town and the other one is privately owned. And in another view, this is provided by the Cape Cod Commission. This whole shoreline along here, you can see outlined with red, is classified as highly vulnerable to sea level rise and erosion. So there are kind of the dual problems here of the nitrogen loading and flooding from sea level rise. So when we think about what PRB solutions we might have, then we can think about flooding as well. So this group is extremely familiar with different PRB options, so I won't go into the details of trench and injection PRBs, but just mention that they have been successful on the Cape before. And what I am looking more at is this newer technology called a bulkhead PRB. So it's really similar to a trench PRB, and then you have wood chips as the media, but instead of being buried in the ground, they're emplaced along a bulkhead wall, kind of like right here, and then they're encased by another additional vinyl perforated sheet. So that allows groundwater from the landward side to move through that bulkhead PRB and then out into the estuary. So similar to a trench, but a little different. And in considering these different options, I think for this site where we're not depth limited, we have shallow groundwater, that injection wells might not be the best PRB option, especially since tidal flushing may disrupt that liquid carbon media. But the bulkhead PRB has that dual advantage of removing nitrogen and providing flooding protection. Additionally, the flushing of saline groundwater has been shown to prevent methane production, which can be problematic in PRBs. So as you're probably thinking, the huge challenge with bulkheads is environmental issues, so sediment and habitat disruption. And in Massachusetts, construction of new bulkheads is only allowed under certain circumstances for good reasons. And so I think in general, building—
Everybody, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today on December 8th.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Anyway, I thought I was doing something weird. Yeah, so in this particular area, we have the potential to learn about modifying existing bulkheads. So maybe creating new bulkheads is not environmentally favorable, but if we could modify existing hard coastal structures to also remove nitrogen in addition to preventing flooding, then that could be really beneficial. Additionally, the cost, there could be some cost savings. The numbers you see here are based on a pilot study in Long Island for a bulkhead PRB based on the kilograms of nitrogen that could be removed per meter of bulkhead PRB. So there's a lot of assumptions that go into that, but potentially there could be cost savings. So this is a little more detail about the proposed design. So a bulkhead is installed or modified at the shoreline, a few feet taller than high tide. You have two layers of vinyl sheeting that are perforated. The red dashes here show the perforation. And when you're designing this, you have to think about how the hydraulic gradient changes with incoming and outgoing tides so that you can kind of optimize the residence time through the PRB. So in this particular area, we don't have a lot of detailed hydraulic information, but following a complete site investigation, then we can use a PRB calculator to constrain how much nitrogen can be removed and how much that would cost. So this is the proposed pilot site here. The yellow lines outline the two parking lot properties right here. And the solid red lines are existing structures. And you can see this area right here is there's kind of a gap in the structures. And so what I would propose would be adding a modified bulkhead PRB on this property right here. So modifying the existing structure to be a PRB, and then adding a new bulkhead over here in purple to serve as flooding control for this area and also remove nitrogen. And if that is successful, then there are a lot of existing hard coastal structures already in place that could be modified. So here's kind of the pilot area we're looking at here. But then if you look further along the shoreline, there are some existing structures, and then this is continuing south here as well along Duck Creek. So there are a lot of questions remaining, a lot of detailed investigation that needs to be done, but I think this could potentially be a beneficial solution in terms of protecting against sea level rise and removing nitrogen. So with that, I will take any questions you have, and Scott can probably answer a lot of those as well. So.
Well, Annika, thank you for doing that. But let me just sneak in one more comment before we open it up for questions, and I hope there are some. So I heard about this technology. I was invited to attend a webinar by EPA Region 1. There's an individual there, Marcel Beliveau, who's their expert on PRBs. And he's been working around the Cape at many other sites. And he invited me to join this webinar. This is a few months back. And we heard about this project on Long Island that Annika mentioned. And we actually heard a detailed presentation with all kinds of pictures of the installation, et cetera. And the bottom line is it works very well. And it struck me that considering this commercial street area, which, you know, it looks to me that there are some potential sea level rise issues going forward in the future for some of these property owners, that they might, and there are some existing hardscape to try to, you know, create some protection there. That there might be a dual benefit here of this technology, in that it might assist property owners in you know, being a little bit more resilient to some sea level rise issues, at the same time providing the nitrogen removal benefits. So we thought it was something worth considering as an option, and that's really all we're putting out there today. Is there's three different, as Annika showed, there's three different PRB types, only two of which we've really looked at on the Cape so far, the injection and the trench method. But this provides a third option to consider, and that's why it's here. And so thank you for doing that, Annika. And why don't we just open it up to questions or comments at this point?
This is the first question I'd be having is like, okay, this looks great. You know, I'm just saying, it's like we're getting into. I mean, I know that length. I know a lot of those bulkheads. A lot of those bulkheads are not in good shape. Right. So we basically be rebuilding bulkheads for property owners, and you know, and that's not a bad thing. You know, I mean that you know, it also protects us against. It's got a dual purpose with the sea level rise. But for a pilot study, I'm thinking, well, why don't we just use where is the latest and greatest, newest bulkhead. And I'm thinking the one around Max is latest, greatest, brand new, be a perfect place to test this thing. If that was how we really wanted to see how good it would be, you know, because that island, that peninsula that basically goes around Mac Shack and the other properties there, isn't that where you are right now, Scott?
Yeah, pretty close. Fred, you mentioned, I want to highlight something you just mentioned because we forgot to mention it. And that is one of the real opportunities with this is to do this when a property owner is doing a bulkhead replacement. That was the idea on Long Island. So that if somebody's going to go to the expense of digging up the shoreline, putting in the sheet pilings, et cetera, what we're saying is let's throw some wood chips in there at the same time to oversimplify it. So the cost of this is something that theoretically, if we'd be doing this in places where people were repairing the bulkheads anyways, all that cost is something that's going to get incurred anyways. So we're trying to be opportunistic here. And we didn't mention that, but I think that's a real benefit of this going forward. But so whether or not there's an existing one, I don't know whether we could retrofit the existing one or not, but we could certainly look at that possibility.
Well, I was just thinking, where is there one that we could easily retrofit that's brand new? And that was the only place I knew of it off the top of my head.
Good question. I don't know.
The sea level rise, the concept of protecting us against flooding as we go forward. That's another thing. There is obviously in my business, there's a lot of assistance available.
Right.
Through people like FEMA right now for exactly this thing. Right. Yep. So maybe it's something you could marry together.
I think that's the idea. Yes.
When because there's a lot of flooding risk along Commercial Street, and if you can, and all those houses and the built property and everything else, and I'm sure you can do a really good cost benefit. Say, hey, we want to do this, that, and the other thing, and combine these two projects. There's some opportunities there, but as far as expense is concerned, obviously putting in a bulkhead is super expensive compared to injecting oil into a ground.
Yes.
And so you'd have to marry this with other benefits is what I'm seeing.
Absolutely. And Patty, I don't think is still with us, but the Cape Cod Commission is in the process of doing a coastal resilience, climate change, sea level rise study. And Annika showed the mapping, which is, I think, performed by the state that shows this, and you know this, Fred, really well, that this is a high vulnerability area. So I guess the thought would be if there is a likelihood going forward, and remember, this is a 30-year plan. So this is not stuff that's going to get built this year or next year, but over the next 30 years, might it be reasonable to assume that people are going to be building some structures along this area? And if so, then this is a technology to consider, as you're saying, marrying with those projects going forward. So I think maybe that's an important consideration, Fred. And maybe you and I can talk more about this offline, about what your view is of those kind of projects and their likelihood of happening along the Wellfleet shoreline, and specifically this area. And then see because I think you're right. The only way this technology is cost effective is if we're going to be joining another project that's already incurring those costs for another purpose.
It's kind of like, Scott, it's really like doing an enhanced IA. Somebody's got to replace the septic system.
Exactly.
That's the perfect opportunity. The one question I wanted to ask Annika was, to Fred's question, can you retrofit, or how difficult is it to retrofit an existing bulkhead? For example, the one that I'm thinking about is the town pier. The town pier has a recirculating sand bed system underneath the pier to handle the waste loads from the bathrooms that are on the pier right now. And when we were doing really detailed nitrogen monitoring on July 4th, you can see how much nitrogen is coming through the groundwater into Wellfleet Harbor from those systems.
That is an excellent question, and I think a really good one to ask. I don't have a specific response. the study, the Long Island study, it was a bulkhead that was being repaired, but they didn't give any specifics on how they repaired it. So I'm not an expert on bulkheads, but in theory, if you just add that additional sheet of vinyl, then that's kind of the first step. I think the harder part would be perforating kind of like the submerged seaward side of the bulkhead wall. So to make sure that you have groundwater actually moving through it instead of just around it. So I think that's where the big challenge would be. So
Got it. So it is totally opportunistic.
I think so.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm
okay.
thinking off the top of my head, Kurt, is maybe you could go on with injection wells within an existing bulkhead if in fact the liquid carbon source could function there. I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but that would be relatively easy to do, an already constructed bulkhead to inject the carbon source there rather than upstream. But
Yeah, but as Annika's mentioned, the perforations are critical so the groundwater can flow through it.
True. Yes, that's right. That's right.
So, but anyway, the thought I'm having is, you know, maybe we can, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, what's in my head is we, you know, for the purposes of the watershed permit, have identified most of the area that was in Annika's outlined area where we've got potential flooding risk, but also that the area beyond those marshes is all the upstream area of the most densely populated areas of the town of Wellfleet, where we're thinking about doing some PRB. And, you know, my thought again was to go from Main Street, you know, the mobile station at Main Street, the Main Street intersection, some sort of PRB technology that goes from there all the way around down Commercial Street, you know, along Kendrick Avenue and even back to and around Kendrick Avenue. That whole, if you were to do PRB technology there, you're picking up probably 30 to 30% of the population in terms of, you know, wastewater flows that are coming to the harbor through both the Mayo Creek system, the Duck Creek system, and direct groundwater flow into Wellfleet Harbor. So that's where this really made a lot of sense to me, Scott, was, you know, in terms of, you know, PRB in that area. And then for the purposes of the watershed permit, there's kind of two elements. One is, okay, well, what areas are you thinking about that would ultimately get you some reductions that you could put on paper and say, this is a big number to go after. And the other part, which is the more important part, which is, you know, Annika coming and presenting some technology options, where could we pilot them and what should we pilot? So I think it's hard for me right now to think about where we've got a bulkhead that's potentially undergoing reconstruction or will undergo reconstruction. We talked about something at Howe's Pond, but that's totally different. But I guess to make this actionable, what we should probably do is at least put it in the suite of technologies, and then over the next 5 years, if there's something that pops up.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. Exactly. That's what I was thinking, Kurt. I'm thinking the same way, that as long as we're aware of the technology, if in fact there are going to be some bulkhead projects, maybe we look at one of those becoming a pilot down the line. And the other thing is we could try a couple of these different technologies. We could do the injection wells at the parking lot now, or not now, but sooner, and then try to target a future project that might be a bulkhead construction as well.
Could I jump in? Because I actually looked at the same thing. And I know that John sees a number of bulkhead replacements while he's sitting in the COMSCOM. And the COMSCOM is actually redoing their regulations right now. I've almost finished my draft on basically the same thing for bulkhead PRBs. To be considered as part of the requirement for some of the seawalls or bulkheads being put in. Currently, Wellfleet has about 16,000 linear feet of seawalls. Approximately 56,000 or 5,600 of those are due for replacement. These are older wooden bulkheads or older concrete bulkheads, but a number of the older bulkheads have already been replaced. and the ones that have been built are going to be there for a while. But right now, basically a third of the total linear feet of the bulkheads in Wellfleet are due for replacement. If you use the Cape Cod Commission factor of 0.6 kilograms per linear feet, it comes out to approximately 3,400 kilograms of nitrogen per year. There is a downside is the carbon medium has a shorter lifespan when it's exposed to saline conditions as opposed to freshwater. But you're still talking probably decades, which is the approximate expected life of a seawall as it is. The other advantage is that you're actually intercepting the groundwater at the shallowest point of its lens. Rather than having this really deep lens, it's right at the shallowest portion of the groundwater lens. So.
Ryan, that's really helpful. And I'd like to
Yeah.
get with you on that. Is there a map that shows that 5,600 feet that is projected?
I have a map, yes.
Could you send that to me, please?
Yep.
And you said that, just to clarify, you said the Concom is looking at wetland reg changes to incorporate this?
The concert, or John, do you want to? Somebody unmute him. Or...
Yeah, we're in the process of totally redoing our regulations, and one of the regulations we're dealing with will be dealing with this particular issue.
Wow,
the question,
that's a great opportunity.
Everything. So yes, this is happening. And just to reinforce what Ryan said, all you have to do is walk along Commercial Street, and a number of those bulkheads are in very bad repair.
Yeah.
And with sea level rise, they're going to be very problematic. And most of the housing there is pre-1978, which means they will be able to replace those bulkheads. So we shouldn't have state won't allow us to put anything in a structure that was after 1978. But if it's pre-1978, they can put in a bulkhead. And I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's something we should definitely let people know, and try to think about getting money for this, because I think a number of these bulkheads are going to go up soon rather than later.
John, are there any permits? Have you seen any active permits recently? Permit requests?
Not for, we get requests all the time, but not for that area right now. We're getting a lot of requests along Chequesset Neck and down on Indian Neck and further down. Right now, we haven't had any. Right now, I haven't seen any requests for Commercial Street or Kendrick.
Because my thought is, even if it's not in the target area, again, to do a pilot, to be able to get one in, monitor, test it, look at what the costs are and so on. So we had local data. That would be great. And Ryan, I had no idea we had that many linear feet, but did you say 3,400 kilograms a year?
Yeah.
If just the old ones were replaced with if it just on the old ones, if they were upgraded to a permeable, and that's based on just the Cape Cod Commission placeholder of 0.6 kilograms per linear feet.
And for that 5,000 linear feet that you think is likely to be need replacing.
Yep. 5,600. Okay.
But anyway, if we could get, from my view, if we could at least get a pilot, it doesn't matter where, a bulkhead is a bulkhead, it is opportunistic, but at least to have the data would be great. There's no reason not to do it at any home anyway, because where's that septic load going from that home?
Yeah. I'm glad we had this discussion today. And Ryan, I thank you so much for mentioning that, because that really makes this whole thing a lot more viable. It strikes me that, I don't know what the cost would be of adding this reactive feature to an existing bulkhead replacement, but I'm going to guess it's a small percentage of the whole bulkhead construction project. So maybe one thing to think about is if we could figure out which ones might be coming and have the town be in a position to offer to pay those incremental costs of essentially adding the wood chips, if you will, and whatever goes along with it.
Monitoring.
The cost effectiveness could be really significant, because it sounds like the landowner is going to be bearing the cost of the seawall construction anyways. So it's a really nice opportunity for the town to invest the marginal costs of adding the reactive feature to it. So this is something we should think about. I'll start, if Ryan can get me that map, and John, if there's regulations under review now, I'd love to look at that too. I don't know how far along that is, but.
You're still on mute, John.
Okay,
Okay,
Hillary
you go.
has the draft of that.
Okay.
You can get that from Hillary.
Okay.
Do you think CONSCOM would be open to something like what we were proposed to the Board of Health, to just draft a regulation around this?
I would think so. COMSCOM is very concerned about nitrogen loading.
Yeah.
There's certain bulkheads that are going to be much more appropriate for this kind of technology, and others that are not. I think around Commercial Street and Kendrick, but mostly Commercial Street, that's the best opportunity, because the construction of the bulkheads there fits with what we're trying to do more than, say, rock revetments.
Right.
John, do you think it would make sense to us to try to get on a CONCOM agenda and make a similar presentation?
I think COMSCOM would be very interested in that.
Okay.
Run that by Hillary.
Okay.
You know, why not rock revetments too? I mean, really, all it's doing, all that you're talking about is during excavation, adding a carbon source, and instead of having to do perforated plastic, you've already got perforation.
Yeah, I suspect there's, there's probably a lot of
I
alternative
mean,
designs here.
why not?
Yep.
It would work there too.
Yes.
Huh. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Annika, very, very much. Does anybody have any other questions? Richard, you've been awfully quiet.
I usually am. Well, I'm listening.
I know you are.
I'm intrigued by the whole cost aspect of it. Is what are all the different possibilities? What's the cost differential, and how do we spread the cost? You know, do we put it on the individual homeowner? You know, the water through the center of town, we put the burden on the individual homeowners, and a lot of them haven't signed up for it. So it's put the water people in somewhat of a bind. And I like the idea of trying to spread the risk over a greater group of people, but I could see people who aren't getting the advantage of an IA system feeling like, why are we having to pay for it? So I'm kind of intrigued by that whole interplay.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me come in. It's great that you guys are already on top of this and you already have numbers. This is awesome.
Hey, the other thing I'll offer is Annika is writing a report, and she's prepared, she didn't show it today, but a pretty detailed spreadsheet that goes through the cost analysis on this, which I think might be helpful. So when I get that and grade it, and I think I already know her grade. What do you guys think? Pretty good grade?
Going to go there.
We'll pass that. We'll pass
John's a former professor too, Scott. You gotta be careful.
Well, I have to say, this is the stuff that I really enjoy the most, is to be able to blend some creative thinking and part of academics with the real world. And I think sometimes the best solutions come out of that mix. So this is exciting. I'm really glad we did this. But I'll get you Annika's report and spreadsheet, which might shed some light on some of the marginal cost features that we're talking about. We don't have the numbers in front of us, but I think it might be helpful. And the good news is we do have a very good case study of this down in Long Island. I'll also provide the copy of that article, which documents that installation down there, so you can read that as well.
Well, one of the images that she used is actually from one that was on the Cape as well.
The Charles River one, is that, Brian?
I don't have my notes in front of me.
Okay.
It's just,
Oh, actually, I think I know which one it was. That's the Waquoit Bay one.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's what it is.
yeah, yeah. That was not technically a bulkhead installation, although it's pretty close because it's really close to the shoreline. And it's worked out really well. I've been talking to Ken Foreman from MBL down in Woods Hole, who designed and built that. I think it's now close to 20 years old, and it's still working very well. And the carbon source is still very much there. So they're starting to get it a little bit at this question is how long do the wood chips last? And I think the answer is a lot longer than we think. So, yeah, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just also mention that the Energy Committee is also looking at remediation for sea level rise, and a number of, well, Commercial Street particularly is under threat of flooding with storm surges on a regular basis. So again, in terms of the cost, there's some cost sharing that can happen with the town and with the funding sources of the towns trying to access to deal with remediation over sea level rise. It's not just homeowners. I mean, Commercial Street already has been flooded with heavy storms. I think that the town has financial interest in this project that will help cut the cost to the individual families or homeowners.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Okay, but and just to kind of put a fine point on the flooding assistance you could get through the people I work for, which is FEMA. I mean, FEMA has billions of dollars in mitigation funds going into the ground for cost-effective mitigations to prevent flooding. And super monies to help plan, monies to help identify projects, monies to help to build those projects. To plan those projects, engineer those projects, and then to build them. So there's a lot of, I mean, if you married a bulkhead that was there to prevent flooding with throwing some chips in front of it to for nitrogen removal, you probably have a really cost-effective project that would be eligible for that all the billions of dollars that FEMA has to give out. But something to think about.
Kurt, I think I just heard an offer to get some FEMA funds for us for a pilot project.
Right before he leaves.
Wait till I retire, guys. Anyway, guys, we should probably get to the next thing because we're already into this for an hour and a half.
Yeah, what I would like to do is I want to hold off on minutes for now because that's kind of a lengthy discussion. And let's try to set our next meeting. What I'll do with the minutes is shoot those out to everybody so they have a chance to review them before we meet next. And we had talked about doing sort of a 2-week schedule. I know, Scott, you were thinking maybe monthly, but I think right now we've got a lot of momentum and a lot of things that we've got to discuss.
Sure.
So with that, just pulling out the calendar. We obviously aren't going to meet the 22nd, I don't think, the week before Christmas, right? Unless, John, you're nodding your head, maybe that would work.
I'm thinking to go anywhere, so we're all here.
Okay, Richard?
Well, I'm traveling, but I'll be available by Zoom.
Okay, Fred?
That's the day after my back surgery, so I don't know if what kind of shape I'm gonna be in.
Yeah, you're out. How about the 29th?
29th, I should be better.
Works for me.
Okay.
Okay, let's do the 29th. And in the meantime, we'll get that EPA report out and our minutes for homework for the next meeting. And also take a look at Ryan's data too. Scott, how are you making out with regard to any kind of drafting or what, how do you see things going forward?
Well, I've been doing a little bit on that, but I think as I mentioned to you, my game plan is to really get into that after the new year and draft the plan through the spring. And I say that for a couple reasons. One is we really got to get the final report from GHD. That's going to be a critical part of this.
Right.
And there's a number of things going on. I would highlight the two things that we talked about today, the whole RME discussion and possibly this PRB project. But the RME discussion, when I look at the spreadsheets and how we're going to solve this problem, it's all about INA. That's the big driver here. So that's got to work. And I have ongoing discussions with Brian Dudley and people at DEP about what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think this RME structure is going to be critical to that. So having said all that, I think we need to vet this RME structure with the wastewater committee. It's probably going to take a couple of meetings. We probably need to go back to Board of Health. So having said all that, that puts us into February, March. And so I think realistically, that's probably the time frame when I can start sharing a draft, because I can't write about things until I know what we're doing. And I mean, I've been doing as much as I can, but we need to make some decisions on some things. And we've got a lot on our plate. So I'm going to say spring is, and I can't be a lot more specific than that, but I hope that works for you.
Well, it's got to be realistic, and I think that's realistic. So, you know, DEP is right there with us now too. I think Hillary's as anxious as I am, as you are, and I think as the committee members are, to really kind of, you know, get this, keep our focus on this to get a product over the finish line.
Yep. Yeah.
And the other thing there is that, you know, if we're gonna be making any requests for town meeting, you know, that's April. We've kind of got to have something formulated if we're going to make a request by, you know, pretty much the January timeframe.
Well, you know, one thing, Kurt, I'm glad you brought that up. And you and I have had this conversation before, but if we are going to do any kind of a PRB project anywhere, there will have to be some preliminary site investigations, some wells put in, water levels. And I think I sent a quote a while back, and as I'm recalling, it was in the $30,000 to $40,000 range to do the site investigation. So that might be one example of something that we might want to think about as a budget item for a pilot project. And that's not to build the pilot project, that's just to do the site investigation to plan it. And you may remember Millie at DEP actually mentioned that she might be able to find some money to actually help us build the project.
Right.
But I think so I would suggest that the committee consider some funding to do some preliminary, what I'll call preliminary site investigations, certainly for the PRB project. And we can decide later where that's going to be, whether it's one of these bulkheads or whether it's one of the parking lots where we do injection wells. I think as long as we have some funding available so that we can move forward on that, that'll be helpful. There may be other items. Maybe you and I can put our heads together, Kurt, and think about what other things might require some money in the next coming year to move this plan forward. That's
well,
one.
95, yeah, 95 Lawrence Road was the other one that was in my mind.
Yes, good point. Good point. Yep.
And, you know, keeping in mind for everybody's benefit, still we should have at some point a strategic discussion, obviously not at this meeting, but, you know, what do we do piecemeal versus, you know, what do we think about as far as, I think there's a risk in doing things piecemeal because, you know, there might be some wildly popular things that we're going to propose that are easy to get through town meeting. There's going to be some things that are not very popular. And I don't think we want to leave those, you know, on their own to get shot down.
Good point.
You know, another one that I'm thinking of is we have a health regulation proposed before the Board of Health, which they are, I think, seriously considering. And remember that included in that is the town providing somewhere between a $10,000 and a $12,000, we'll call it a subsidy for these enhanced INAs. So let's say we put, you know, a dozen or more of those in over the next year. There's a budget item there that right now there's no money for. If the Board of Health decides they want to move forward with it.
No, there is money.
Okay. Okay.
What I want to see happen there is, and I think the committee felt the same way, is we've got Airbnb money that's coming into the town now to the tune of whatever it's going to be, $400,000 or $500,000. You know, the town's earmarked amount, which was supposed to be for wastewater, which currently goes into the general fund. So that amount of money just so happens to be almost equal to what you had proposed, Scott, in terms of the number of required systems. That would be exactly the right amount of money to fund that program.
Okay, well, there is, we need to think about that a little bit more because I just sat in on a couple meetings where they finalized the regulations on this so-called Cape and Islands Water Trust Fund.
No, that's different pot
Okay.
of money. What I'm
Okay,
talking
okay.
about is the town's 2% share.
Okay, okay,
It directly comes into the town. What you're
All right.
talking about is the other pot of money. So the town right now is receiving its portion of Airbnb taxes. It's like 2%.
and who has that, who has their fingers on that checkbook for that money?
Dan used to. I've tried to reach out to Maria to circle back on that and find out what she knows. We had a little bit of an issue with our town treasurer. Bottom line is there is money coming in. We just have to, identify it and then make a pitch for why it should be going to wastewater, which it was supposed to do in the first place.
Okay, good. Well, I think those are the two items I can think about. A PRB site investigation, call it 30 to 40,000, and then some money for these INA systems if the Board of Health goes ahead.
And 95.
And Route right, 95 Lawrence. And that's the other reason why the spring makes sense. I forgot to mention that, but I've been working with those consultants, and they are getting the RFP together for that project. And that's going to go out at the beginning of the year as well. And we should have a better fix on what that treatment system might look like and what the town's cost share in that is, which is what you're referring to, Kurt. So that's, so those are the three items that I can think of right now. And they may be more, but let's get together on that, Kurt. Maybe we can bring back that list for this committee the next time we meet.
Yeah, so why don't we plan on that as an item for the meeting on the 29th for sure.
Yep.
And then we've got this RME stuff to talk about. We got to get to minutes. And anything else for that meeting, guys, that John, Fred, Richard, if you think of anything, let me know. Ryan?
So, I mean, just quickly, I was just saying I think we should read that thing about the management, what is it called? The RME.
Entities.
RME.
Yeah, and just kind of like, see which way we want to go, because like I said, there are systems and processes in place. So just like, okay, reading all this, what do you think is, what is our recommendation? Because obviously we need to do this. So, okay, which one is we going to do? What do we think is going to be best bang for the buck? How are we going to do this? And there's, like if I was a homeowner, I don't know if I might be saying, I'll do this myself. I have a septic system. We all have septic systems. We're basically taking care of them ourselves, What is that a good way of doing business? I don't know, but like it definitely there's a lot of Yankee home rule down here,
Well, I feel the same way, Fred. I don't want to get into it too much because I agree. It's one of the things I raised with Scott was, you've got people like John Smith who are putting these systems in, and ordinarily you would hold that contractor accountable with a performance warranty for that system. So there's a technical, process in place right now. So we can talk more about that. I'm anxious to read, EPA's report. And be thinking about it in from all these different perspectives. Between Richard, John, Fred, and I, we all have a lot of practical business experience as well, and not just being septic homeowners and Wellfleet for what might make some sense.
I'll send that EPA report around, Kurt. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be meeting with Patty and Brian and others on this subject over the next several weeks. So I think, although I don't think we'll have a recommendation the next time we meet, it's probably at least a month or more out before I think that group can put together a recommendation or several recommendations for the town to consider. But in the meantime, I think it would be good for some or all of you to look at this EPA report that Brian referenced. But I think it'll be a good background.
Yeah. The other thing I see coming out of it is that we, the heads that are around the table right now may have an ideal looking at that report that says, we think this would make a lot of sense for the town of Wellfleet to go back to those guys and saying, here's where we need help. It's in this area, this area, this area.
Yep.
If those are the services that you could provide us, that's a home run. That's a slam dunk. So I think it might be, it might be helpful iteratively as well.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how receptive they are, or if they're thinking that, no, we're going to figure it out and we'll have some proposals to make, but, you know, maybe our input would be helpful.
Okay.
You're not, that's lukewarm. Maybe not so, okay.
No, I think it will be. I think it will be. I think the first step is for everybody to take a look at this report.
Yeah.
And we'll get Brian and probably Patty back, but I don't think it'll be the next time we meet in 2 weeks. It'll be sometime in January, probably.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And thank you for, I was really grateful to see Jack on the call. That was very nice of him to join it.
He's pretty enthusiastic about this. He and I serve on the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce so-called Wastewater Task Force. And we took this up at the end of one of the meetings. We always go around the table. So I was telling him about Wellfleet, and he took me aside and said, you know, hey, I want to talk to you about this. So he seems pretty motivated, and I think we want to take advantage of it.
And I think everybody knows he is Barnstable County Town Administrator, Richard, so.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else? No?
Motion to adjourn?
1 second.
Go ahead, Brian.
I know that the select board has discussed trying to have a update from the wastewater committee beyond just Scott. I would just say, think about when that might be convenient, and see if we can work something out for an update from the wastewater committee to the entire board.
Sometime in January makes sense?
It would make sense to me. I'm fairly flexible, so it depends on everybody else.
You know, we're anxious to be responsive. I didn't know if is the board interested in hearing from us sooner or just in due course, or?
I think it would be, so speaking personally, I think it would be better to do it sooner rather than later. Just because if I don't want to see too much effort being expended on something that might not necessarily be considered by the select board. But at the same time, if things are okayed by the select board, that's also a way to say, all right, we have support and you can do a full go. So it's just a matter of that. I'm not gonna, yeah. So.
Hey, Ryan, I have a question. Given what we just talked about with the town meeting warrant and looking for money for some of these things, would it be the Board of Selectmen that puts that warrant forward?
Yes.
So that would be, and when's the warrant deadline?
I'd have to look it up. We haven't officially set, well, we haven't changed town meetings date yet for this year. I would say that, we can expect that we'll still be dealing with the same COVID restrictions as we did with the meeting in the fall. But my expectation is to have town meeting, around the same time as normal, because we just have to, go on and hope and have, but at the same time, it's contingent on it being outside. So we'll see how that goes. So that's a quick way of saying I'm not really sure.
Okay.
It's in April. The historic precedent, Scott, is it's an April meeting. Typically, in order to have a warrant item, you've got to pretty much have it formulated in the January or early February timeframe for the board to consider it and for it to get ultimately placed in the warrant in a timely fashion.
Yeah, we're having a joint meeting with the Finance Committee on the 16th. So this is really when the warrant's starting to be put together right now.
Well, Kurt, what about this? I mean, as a suggestion, we're going to meet in a couple of weeks to talk about some of these budgetary items. And this committee can, put their blessing on what they want to ask for. So that's kind of suggests maybe a meeting sometime in January, early to mid-January with the select board to go over that and try to get it on the warrant. Might make sense.
That would be good timing. Terrific. Motion to adjourn. There was one on the table. Anybody want to second it?
I can't second it.
I second it. Let's get on it. I'm done.
All those in favor?
I'm in favor. Let's go.
Aye. Is he, I think John's muted, but John, are you, I'm assuming that's unanimous?
Thank you, everybody. And Annika, thank
Yes.
you.